Showing the data. So I know that's probably not everybody's favorite thing. I love data, but I know everyone doesn't, so I'll get through it quickly so that it's not too painful. So I'm going to start with our mortality data, and most of this data is going to be Kansas specific. So anyone that's not from Kansas, we apologize, I don't have a whole lot of national statistics here. So this chart that you're seeing here is looking at trends in drug overdose deaths in Kansas for a 20-year period. And that top blue line, you're looking at all drugs. So that's the total number of drug overdose deaths. And then the orange line are all opioids. The reddish pink line are stimulants, and then benzodiazepines are the blue line there. And that's up till 2018 on that graph. And you'll see below here on the summary for 2019 that only goes through September of 2019, so it's not a full year of data, but we can already see that there's an increase in psychostimulants from 2018 to 2019, even though it's not a full year of data. So I'm sure it's only going to get worse when we have the complete data set. And then synthetic opioids were already at 42 deaths in 2019 up until September, and we only had 52 in 2018. So I would assume that that would probably be higher with the rest of the data, as well as heroin, which was 33 in 2018, is already at 31 deaths in 2019 with the partial data. There is another statistic that you can look at on the NCHS website, the National Center of Health Statistics, and they do some prospective drug overdose reporting. And they're showing from January 2019 to January 2020 in Kansas, we had 348 overdose deaths, so that'd be our 2019 data, and then we only had 346 in 2018, so that's an increase. And nationally, we're seeing an overall decrease in specifically prescription opioids and other opioid deaths decline, as well as the overall drug overdose death rate. And Kansas is going up, so we're going in the wrong direction while most are going down. This chart is just looking at the opioids, so it's showing on the top line, it's looking at prescription opioids, then the teal line-ish is synthetic opioids, followed by heroin with the blue line, and that orange is methadone overdose deaths. And so you'll see it's of particular interest that there are a spike in heroin and synthetic opioids. So synthetic opioids includes things like fentanyl. And those look like they're going to skyrocket in 2019. They'll only go up, as we've seen from the numbers. And so prescription drug opioids seem to be on the decline, while those two are on the increase. And methadone's been on a gradual decrease over time as well, which is great. This is just another way to look at the data. We're looking at county drug overdose deaths and kind of hotspot mapping. And Woodson County had the highest rate, and that's down in southeast Kansas. It's the WO1 of 27.3 was their highest rate. And then some other counties were Osborne and Barber County of high risk, but that's just to get an idea of where our overdoses are happening. And some counties may not have enough data. If they had less than 5 drug overdose deaths in this time period, they're not reported, so that's why they're that whitish color. This chart is looking at our 2018 drug overdose deaths by age and type of drug. And you'll see that the 35 to 44-year-olds are have the highest drug overdose death rate, and opioids are our highest drug of overdose deaths in 2018. When you look at the 2019 data, it moves down in the age range to 25 to 34 rather than the 35 to 44 range. And so younger folks are now the highest in 2019. And again, this is just partial year of data up until September. And the psychostimulants you can see increased greatly. I'll go back to the 2018 data to show you. If you look at the psychostimulants there in teal, they go up quite a bit in 2019 just with the partial data. And this is looking at age group and year just by opioids like that other graph, but looking at the age groups. Prescription opioids were the main concern in 2018, as you can see on the left there in green. And then in 2019, there's a sharp increase in synthetic opioids. Again, that's like fentanyl. And there's a pretty sharp decline in prescription opioids, which is great, but then the synthetic opioids and heroin are on the rise, which are much more dangerous. This chart is looking at type of drug and gender. And you can see that males are consistently higher. They have higher overdose death rates than females, except for when you look at the prescription opioids and the benzodiazepines, which are also often prescriptions. So there might be something there that comes into play where females might be more willing to seek out help and get prescriptions because they're going to the doctors more, or they're actually seeking that help, while men may not be as willing to do so, I guess. Now we're going to look at non-fatal overdose data. So this is emergency department data. So they're obviously, they didn't pass away, they were just non-fatal overdoses and they came into the emergency department. So this is looking at 2018 and 2019. And again, this 2019 data is only through September, so it's not a full year, but we can already see an increase in heroin and synthetic opioids with just a partial year of data from 2019 compared to 2018. So of course, those are also a concern in the ED visits, which isn't surprising if we have an increase of the overdose deaths, of course. This map is looking at those emergency department data by county, and Douglas County had the highest rate of 12.76, and same goes here. If there were low numbers, there wasn't any data reported, and that's why they're that white color. This chart is looking at those overdose emergency department visits by age and year, and you'll notice that the 15 to 24-year-olds are consistently highest for our emergency departments due to overdose from drugs. But then it's also important to note in 2019, I'm not sure what was going on, but our 11 to 14-year-olds increased in poisonings and non-fatal emergency department visits, which is really interesting, and I'd be curious to see why that is and what's happening, but something to definitely pay attention to. This is looking at those emergency department visits by gender, and females are consistently higher. I personally think that it might have something to do with we're more likely to seek help and go to the doctor and whatnot, and more likely to get diagnosed with different things than males are. And also I think males can, since we see that their misuse is higher with those illicit drugs, that might play a role too, that they're more dangerous and maybe they're overdosing more rather than going to the emergency department. Now we're going to look at K-TRACS data. That's our prescription drug monitoring program that monitors all of our controlled substance prescriptions that are distributed by the pharmacy. So it only tracks the prescription once it's been picked up from the pharmacy. And so that's what the data set is. This graph is looking at the different types of drugs and how many prescriptions we had by that drug class. And you'll see that opioids, of course, were the highest in 2016 and 2017. Followed by benzodiazepines and then stimulants. And the second half down here at the bottom is showing that our prescription rates per 100 residents in Kansas by drug and age. And so you'll see with opioids and benzodiazepines, as we get older, we're more likely to get more prescriptions. And typically those are more common. And so you'll see that once we're at the 45-year-old age range, there are more prescription opioids than there are people. So it's 128.9 prescriptions per 100 residents. So that's where it starts to really spike to where it's more than just more prescriptions than people. Benzodiazepines takes a little longer until we're at the 85-year age range, but it's also of concern there. Stimulants has the opposite effect, which isn't surprising because you think younger kids are typically more prone to having ADHD and prescriptions that go along with it. So it makes sense that that trend would go that way, that as we get older, there are less stimulant prescriptions happening. This is just the county map of opioid prescriptions by county, and just showing those highest rate counties for opioid prescriptions. And so you'll see the highest one was there in Greenwood for 91.8. Sorry for my dogs. 191.8 was the highest county per 100 people in the county. 1 second, I'm going to just lock my dogs out. All right, sorry about that. They're normally more disruptive if I lock them out of the room, so I didn't lock them out, but they're going to have to deal with it. So yeah, this is just a county map showing the counties that have more prescriptions than people in the county per 100 residents. This one is looking at the number of high-risk patients. So they define high-risk patients that are at higher risk for a drug overdose or accidental poisonings, or just overdose in general because of the high doses. So the first one is the 90+ daily MME, which is the morphine milligram equivalents. And so those are just basically high dose opioids. The second piece there in the almost like light purple color are just long acting opioids, then followed by benzodiazepines and stimulants in purple, and overlapping opioids and benzodiazepine prescriptions in this yellowish color. And that's obviously the biggest concern. So opioids and benzodiazepines together are very dangerous and can be deadly. So when those are prescribed together, people are at a lot higher risk. Same thing that goes for high dose opioids. And there was a study that was just released that found a correlation of the higher the dose that a family member in the household has, the higher likelihood of youth overdose as well. So there's a correlation there between high doses and also youth overdoses, which would potentially be, they may be misusing somebody else's medications in the home. But yeah, so the opioid and benzodiazepine prescription overlaps are most important and obviously of biggest concern because they're the highest number there and very dangerous together. The second half is looking at the per 100 residents, again, by high risk patients. And you can see the same kind of trend as we get older, the higher dose opioids and those overlapping opioids and benzodiazepines continue to rise. So to keep in mind for sure with our older adult population. This is a map of looking at number of patients that have high dose opioids. So those counties that are at higher risk for people to have overdose because of their prescribing patterns in their county. I'm going to look at just some behavioral health data and our substance use disorder treatment trends. This data is not as up to date. The most recent data we have is up to 2016. And this one's looking at our primary methamphetamine admissions. And we hear a lot from our treatment folks that meth is a huge concern in our treatment facilities and one of our biggest primary drug of concern. But you can see in 2016, our rate was significantly higher than the US rate for treatment admissions due to meth in Kansas. This one's looking at heroin on the left, and then our non-heroin opioid and synthetic, so everything else. And our rates are consistently and significantly below the US rate, which is great. This chart is looking at our methamphetamine lab seizures from KBI, our Kansas Bureau of Investigation. And you can see the decline in the trend line. In 2018, they only had 6 drug seizures as compared to 2005, and we had 387. So we've made a lot of great progress there. However, as this is declining, there's a kind of an underlying root cause of that is that the drug dealers are selling it at cheaper price. So they have higher availability and cheaper prices. So in 2014, a cost for an ounce of meth on the street was between $800 and $1,200 in Kansas. And in 2019, that's $250 to $500. So it's a significant difference. So it's a lot cheaper and a lot more available. So we're not seeing as many like at-home labs because of that. Those 6 sites that we had in 2018, this map is showing where they were, all in Southeast Kansas. 1 in Anderson County, 2 in Bourbon County, 1 in Crawford, and 2 in Cherokee County, just to see where those seizures were happening. And this next one is looking at the Kansas Communities That Care Student Survey, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. This is looking at our 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders in Kansas by county and their reporting of past 30-day prescription opioid misuse. And so the darker the color, the higher rate of youth reporting that they've misused a prescription opioid in the past 30 days. This one is the same source, but looking at stimulant misuse in the past 30 days by county. And of course, the same applies here with the color getting darker, the higher the rate of students reporting that they've misused a stimulant in the past 30 days, a prescription stimulant specifically. And this one is looking at where these youth report they got those prescription drugs to misuse. So this big blue portion in the top or the left side circle is source of a friend or relative. And then the gray is a drug dealer. They got it on the internet in green, or from a stranger in gold. And so the biggest concern is that friend or relative as the source. The smaller pie chart on the right is breaking down that friend or relative source. So either the friend or relative gave it to them, they bought it from them, or they took it from a friend or relative. And you can see that a friend or relative gave it to me is the highest at 41.55%. But that overall, over 70% of our youth say that they got a prescription drug to misuse from a friend or family. So that's a lot of the prevention strategies that Dena is going to talk about surround safe use, storage, and disposal because of this statistic. I just wanted to briefly kind of go over what we're doing in Kansas associated with opioid prevention. KDHE has a CDC grant, and it's called the Overdose Data to, I missed a word, Overdose Data to Action. And they are looking at decreasing prescription drug overdose deaths. So they're working on prevention there. And they also work with our prescription drug monitoring program, K-Tracks, to do some enhancements. And they provide funding to community coalitions and local health departments as well. And it's a 3-year grant. KDADS has the state opioid response, which comes from SAMHSA. And that's primarily looking at substance use disorder treatment. There is some dollars for prevention. They just recently had an RFP and made an award. So those prevention efforts should be getting underway soon, and treatment's been happening for a while now. And they just also switched up to where more providers are able to bill for this opioid use disorder treatment. So they opened it up, which is great. We also have the Partnerships for Success 2015 prescription drug initiative from KDADS, which is also a SAMHSA grant. It started in 2015 and ends this year in September. So we're almost over with that. But with that grant, we facilitate the Prescription Drug and Opioid Advisory Committee. We provide community coalitions with funding in Sedgwick County and Finney County. And I saw Finney County's on this call. So they're also experts in this area. And we appreciate all the work they've been putting in. Over the past 5 years, we've been seeing some great outcomes. And those are the biggest pieces of that grant that ends in September. And as I mentioned, we have the Prescription Drug and Opioid Advisory Committee, and that's funded by both KDADS and KDHE for DECA to facilitate this advisory committee so that we have one coordinated collaborative approach rather than having 2 or more separate approaches happening. We have one group getting together and writing our strategic plan and doing annual updates and whatnot. So we're all on the same page and we're all trying to push the same strategies forward, and we're not duplicating efforts. And Dena is going to share more information on this website, but the preventoverdoseks.org website has all the information, all of that data you saw from our mortality, K-Tracks, and our ED emergency department visits. You can find on that website, as well as our strategic plan and annual report updates and more information about the advisory committee. And we always welcome people to participate if you're interested in being a part of the advisory committee. And I'm gonna pass it on to Dena.
And thank you, Krista. And with that, I'm gonna add, if you haven't had a chance to check out that website that Krista referred to, we will include the link later, but I encourage everyone to check it out. It's very thorough, and there's lots and lots of resources available on there. So we're going to go ahead and go to our next slide, which we're going to talk about safe use first. And as we're going through this, I want you to look at, are your loved ones taking their medications safely?
Dena, it looks like you're muted.